doing this for 20 years, you'd think I'd not need the notes, but I think either I've gotten less able to talk about things or it's gotten more complicated and I need notes. So bear with me on this. I don't just come up with stuff like I used to. One of the things I wanted to say is I thought that it was pretty bad when we were called deplorable, but now we're called terrorists. The MAGA people are all terrorists. So hello to all my fellow terrorists. Huh? Yeah, I know, we've gone from deplorable, now we're terrorists. But one of the things I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the State Board of Education, because a lot of people, and it's really hard to understand how all these things interact and interface with each other. The State Board of Education, though, is a 15-member body, and it's an elected body, as you know, because you elect me, and I have been elected from this district for 20 years. And to the State Board of Education, I bring a lot of education background. I spent, brace yourself, 47 years in education before I retired. So I have that background, but the fact is, I kind of live and breathe education because I had that kind of background in education, and it was sort of a natural thing. And have someone from Weatherford ISD back there. Weatherford ISD was great because they realized how important it was to get a teacher on the State Board of Education, and so they helped me by, you know, I had lots of days that I had to be out and so forth, but I actually had not been sick for 30 years, and so I had lots of days, and they worked with me to do that, and that was real important because at the time I went on the State Board of Education, I was one of 2 teachers out of the 15. And people often say, well, why don't we have just more teachers on the State Board of Education? And we do have more teachers now, but that's not important. It's really important to get people who have a heart for education. And I don't care whether you're a teacher or whether you're a lawyer or whatever. They was famous for having so many dentists on the State Board of Education in the last few years. If your heart is there for this public school, then you have a place on the State Board of Education, and everybody brings a certain talent. We can't get along without a lawyer being on the board because they're always the one we go to, like, is that legal? Is that legal? You know, can we do that? So we do have our own lawyers, but the lawyers are very good to help us break down what we're going through and what we're doing. So the State Board of Education, and I'm going to read you a quote. This is what I had to have the note card for. I'm going to read you the reason that I decided to run again for the State Board of Education. I really have been blessed to be able to do this for so long and to be given the opportunity to do this. It is a non-paying job, but it's one of those things that you know, you can work around it if you really want to do it. But I could not quite leave it this time with the state of education being what it is right now. And one of the lines I like to hear say is what Abraham Lincoln said, and it was, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. And what is happening right now in that classroom is going to be reflected on down the road. And so that is why I felt is it emergency? So I felt like I offered, I'm the longest serving person on the board, and I had a very strong conservative draw. And so it's really nerve-wracking when you move out of something because you're not sure the person who's going to replace you is going to have the courage to stay ahead of what's going on. To give you an idea, whenever we did the critical race theory in the last session, I was seeing them do all kinds of weird stuff with this. And finally, I just got in there and started helping with it. And fortunately, really got to know Dan Patrick much better than I'd ever known him before. And had a lot of admiration for the man because he is one of those people that, let's go, let's get it done. I don't want to hear him, back. One group said, well, we don't want to go with that. And he said, we're not here to decide what you want to go with. We're here to decide what's best for kids. And I appreciated that. So I worked really hard with that group. The thing about it is, it's very confusing, and the majority of the people trying to figure out what we were doing, they would say, well, we like this other. Well, that other doesn't work. The other is illegal, or the other. But what happened is they kept letting Democrats pile into this whole thing, and they were pulling us off in all kinds of directions. It was really kind of wild, because like if they ever went to a meeting on the floor, then the Democrats would start having bills, things to add to it. So it kept messing the bill up, so it just kept getting further and further into the, I think it was in the second special session before we got it cleaned up so that it could be a bill. And then at the end of the day, we were so worried about making the wording right. We got the Heritage Foundation help us with a lot of that. At the end of the day, we forgot to put in there, what happens if you don't follow the rules?
Mm-hmm.
Which is really gonna have to be the first thing on the agenda in January.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people, like you and I, probably grew up thinking, that's a rule, that's what I do. But we know that people don't always follow that. And so you have to have some sort of way of corralling the people to do what they need to do. You can say, we don't want critical race theory, we don't want the gender affirmation things going on in the school, but if someone chooses to do it, you've got to have a punishment for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that bill does not have anything like that in there. It's a good bill. It tells you what you should not be doing, and it doesn't say that, unlike the media tries to tell you, it doesn't say that if you teach about the Holocaust, the negatives of the Holocaust, you've got to teach about the positives. That is no way in that bill. That is a purposeful misinterpretation of that. And so it is a good bill. But let me get back to what the board itself does. The board, 15 members from all over the state, elected every 4 years or every 2 years, depending on if you have a census, which would be this last one. The board's main goals originally, main goal was to take care of what they call the permanent school fund. The permanent school fund is money that has been set aside for education in Texas, and it was really specifically for textbooks. Back in the day, whenever that was put into the Constitution, the children who didn't have books felt like they couldn't go to school. So Texas, from ever and a day, is one of those places that always provided the textbooks for children. And now we don't call them textbooks anymore. We call it instructional material, because sometimes it's a computer, sometimes it's a computer program, and that sort of stuff. So instructional materials kind of encompass the textbook and so forth. A lot of schools, when I was working at Weatherford, they let me have a classroom set, hard copy of the book, then we got the other one online. So I'm one of those people that thinks that we really need to have hard copies, especially for the little children. To think that they would go in and have to read off a computer, and we know that that's not even good for adults, it's really not good for children. But the industry has changed, and that is somewhat because of the legislature. They did a bill about 6 years ago that kind of cut the knees out from underneath the State Board of Education, and they said that the book only has to have 50% of the standards in it to be purchased. And it doesn't mean that that's all they have to have, but they have to be able to show where they're getting the other 50%. If they only have 50%, they've got to show where they're getting that. But I venture to say very few of the schools do a real good job of showing where they're getting the other 50%. And so they've stepped up the process so they can find out. But, and I will say that when I was in Weatherford, the word was, just get the ones that have 100%, and you don't have to worry about it. And that's what they did. I don't know if that's one of their processes still now, but that was, I thought, a good way. We just didn't look at anything that didn't have 100%. But that's the legislature kind of meddling. They should have thought about that before they started meddling. And one of my things in January, I've got a lot of things on my schedule in January, would be to get a reversal on that particular ruling, so that we would go back. Texas no longer controls the textbooks for the nation like it once did. And when they took that out from us, That's what it diminished that. Now, that's not real smart, is it? We control the textbooks that are going all around the nation, and they would look at the Texas book and they'd pull out all this stuff they didn't want a Texas in there, but basically it was our book. Then they say, oh, you don't have to have 50%. So I can tell you that in the last 10 years, the quality of our textbooks has gone drastically down. And you can talk to teachers in the classroom and they'll say, it's not as good a guide as it used to be, you know, and so forth. And that's one reason why it's very frustrating for the state board, because you think, wait, we were doing this quite well.
Mm-hmm.
And then just one piece of legislation takes that away. At any rate, one of the things I was telling you about was the permanent school fund. The permanent school fund has, it had until shortly, a little while ago, $50 billion in there. I don't know what it has today. It might have a little bit less than that. The market did not do well, and of course that reflects in the amount in the fund. But it's a $50 billion fund, and what we do is we don't mess with the corpus of that fund. We use the interest, thank you, the interest from the fund to pay for those instructional materials. And that usually results in about $2 billion in the biennium to give to local school districts to buy the materials that they need. And it also includes their technology materials, the computers and computer programs and stuff like that for the classroom. But we have about 40 billion. The land office has about 10 billion, and we just this year formed a corporation, and I've got brochures here if you want to read about it, to blend our work together so that we could save money on investments. The general land office was not investing their money, so we were losing quite a few $1 million every year not having invested. We have ours very diversified and invested, and so we're just taking that money and investing it for them, so that we've kind of blended the two together. It really is a logical thing to do, and probably should have been done a long time ago. But you know how people are territorial and they don't want to give up their territory? Well, George Bush was out campaigning. We were able to get that thing taken care of. So that's an advantage of someone being out of the office a little bit more than usual. And we were able to work out that corporation. Another thing that we do that is very, very important is the writing of the standards, the standards from which a school district will write their curriculum. The state board does not write the standards, although I've seen some preliminaries of some social studies things that I might be writing it after it's all said and done. I was a world history teacher, and I was looking at the preliminary stuff that they're working on right now, and they have taken, like the Greeks and the Romans and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. I said, well, where is that? They said, well, we were thinking maybe we wouldn't cover that. And I'm thinking, you're gonna think again, because we're gonna cover that. You know, that's a part of the thing. But it's that sort of thing, because we bring in teachers to do that. Now, I have to tell you, when I was a teacher and working on these things, which I did, I hate to say this, when they did the original standards, in 1998, I was on the writing team, so I've been around for a while. I would have never come in and said, I believe we'd like to take out the Greeks and the Romans and start with the Renaissance time period. It's not going to happen. And they were doing kind of a dance saying, well, thought we'd go back and do that later. I haven't seen anything that said we're going to go back and do that later, but don't worry, it will be in there. That sort of thing takes a lot of time and energy to watch every step, because we have groups of teachers working on it. And so what you hope to goodness is that all the teachers are involved in doing it correctly, but we have enough eyes on it so that if this does come to be, you know, submitted to us as a board, the next eyes are my eyes, because that's not going to happen. I can't understand why in school, now this is going to step on some people's toes, we've kind of gotten carried away with all this early college. We've gotten carried away with AP and all this sort of stuff. there's no child should have 6 AP classes, but they're doing 6 AP classes. And what it does is they don't really learn much about the subjects they're working on. They're kind of discombobulated and they're just getting it through. And it's really hard on kids, and I don't think it's a real good idea. But what happens is they get to college, they got there, but I don't know that they're really could say that they've had the equivalent of a college class, because they're not mature enough in a lot of ways to take some of those courses. I think they tend to do better in the math and science than they do in the social studies, because of that. The math and science is like a more of a gift that you have to do mathematics, and they tend to pick that up. You can do that very, very early, and they would be bored if they didn't have it. But sometimes I think we put too much pressure. Well, oddly enough, the College Board has decided to cut out Greece, Rome, Egypt, etc. So I suppose that's what they're trying to do, is follow that. We'll see. But fortunately, I'm the gatekeeper at the board level, and so my fellow board members and I will be very much aware of that. But we set the standards. We finished in 2021, I can't remember how, 2020, we finished the health standards. And you were talking something about the health standards today. If you can believe this, even after having done that and already ready to buy the books, and the books are going to go into the classroom this year, we've found some peculiar things that I don't think that we approved of, and that they are showing up in some of this material. Now, here's the problem. We only had one book that the state board agreed to put into the choice for what the TEA or the state board would approve. I've heard from districts further east that said the state board approved of another product, and we didn't approve of it. But that's what they're telling their school district. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. There are little things like that going on, but the one that stopped me, took up most of my day-to-day, was instead of saying, if it's in health, and it was talking about pregnancy, and it said pregnant person instead of pregnant woman. And that's very, like under the radar. And I don't know how, there are a lot of people looking at these books, how that passed us without noticing that before we approved of that book. So I'm on a roll right now trying to find out if that was indeed in there when we agreed to go with that particular book. It's going to be interesting. And I contacted the TEA and I said, why would we have put person instead of woman? And they said, well, that's what the CDC does. I started to say, well, that's a good reason not to do it that way. And my note to them was kind of snarky, and I thought, no, back off. They're not going to have the same feeling about CDC that I do, so I backed off on that particular thing. But anyway, that's the sort of thing that takes up a tremendous amount of time, trying to make sure that nothing slips past you, because it's very easy to kind of turn the page and miss something. And so what happens is, we also did the science, and we had a really hard time. I am one of these people, I hope no one in here has an electric car, because I'll step on your toes. But they had all these science people coming down and saying, we're going to talk to them about having electric cars. I'm like, they don't even know what rare earth minerals are, and they can't have electric cars without rare earth minerals. So let's get back to the basic here. Where do those rare earth minerals come from? China. Well, they also come from Africa, because they have child labor that goes into those mines and does all that stuff. And do you realize, if you ask some of these people, what are you going to do about plastic if you take away the fossil fuel industry? Well, I mean, just plastic. And honestly, we actually had some of the science teachers who weren't very good at answering some of those questions. So I got recognized by the Texas Energy Council, because I was in there fighting for every bit of the idea of keeping our fossil fuels until such time as we can actually find an alternative that's very, very works well. The idea, and I'm a bird lover, and I hate the fact that the turbines are killing millions of my favorite birds here. But the fact is, we can put a slant in a textbook that makes the kids say, oh man, we gotta do all the solar panels, we gotta do all this, and it have no validity to it. So we've got to check all those books very, very closely to see what, you know, how the bias is in that book. I actually taught world geography, and we had to do some of the science stuff in that, and I remember for 10 years we had a book that said we were, it was global cooling. The earth was cooling. And then the next edition of the textbook, yeah. Now I've taught this, am I running over? Oh, okay, when you came around I thought, I can get kind of carried away here with this. I do want to tell you one that was really cool though, and some of you, how many of you are at Lockheed Martin? I met this child over here that works at Lockheed Martin. He has 4 kids. I thought he was a college student. Anyway, one of the things that we did that was kind of neat was I got a phone call from, since I've been in the education world for a long, long time, I have a lot of contacts out there. And fortunately what I did for a number of years at Weatherford was I was kind of a content specialist for not only social studies, but for other things. So I got to know science people, math people, and all this stuff. Well, one of my science friends called and she said, Pat, we're a member of this physics group over here. They were physics teachers as well as physics professors. And they said, we really want to have standards for quantum physics. And I said, oh, that sounds good to me. I couldn't tell you what quantum physics is, but I'm glad you want to do this. And so I said, let's work on what you want in there and so forth and so on. So I had to go back to the board and make that recommendation because none of the people that were working on the standards made that recommendation. And I dared anyone, I said, don't ask me a question about what I'm talking about. I've got this down and I'm going to give you this information. And so we went ahead and passed and put into our physics, quantum physics, several of the standards, which means that they will then teach it. And so I was just thinking, about a week or two later, I heard the governor come out and say, we need to go on such and such with quantum physics. I thought, hey, we're ahead of it. We've got that. Turns out, one of the people that had come to me, the teacher, education science teacher at UT Arlington, had thought, well, I'm going to study up on this, what we should be doing and so forth. And she wrote a grant and got nearly $1 million to teach the teachers in Texas how to teach the quantum physics. That's why it hadn't been put in the standards, because it's so cutting edge, they didn't feel comfortable with it. So now we have nearly $1 million to teach them. And then Alba John Browner, she didn't get selected to be on the White House Council for Science Teachers, like 25 people nationwide. And come to find out, we're the only state in the United States who has quantum physics in their state standards. So, now don't ask me what quantum physics is, but we've got it. We're ready to go with it. Okay, so what we do is, it's a whole variety of subjects. The core subjects are, to me, the most important, but we do the other things too. But those are just some examples. Right now we're working on the social studies. It'll take about a year or so to get that done, and then we'll vote on it. I promise you Texas will be in there loud and proud. So it's not going anywhere, even though I have heard this, if you can believe this. People say, well, I think maybe we just push this Texas too much, and I go, and where are you from? and we don't need that kind of attitude. The other thing is charter schools, and I am not familiar. Do y'all have many charter schools in this area?
I don't think so.
You know, it's not a thing in the rural areas. It's usually a thing in the big cities. And I just got recognized for being a promoter of the charter schools. I'm a charter school person where you need a charter school. If the school's doing a good job, you shouldn't have to have a charter school. But if the school is not reaching the kids, and they're so big, I mean, when you think of 2,000 kids in an elementary school, it's a lot of kids. And so a lot of kids just can't do well under those circumstances. But charter schools are a public school. I probably split the baby. I do half of them, and I won't vote for half of them. But one thing I've learned to look for are the CRT terms. And this has been going on for the last few years. If they say we want equity, that goes out. If they say, what's the other one? Oh, restorative discipline.
Yes.
Restorative discipline. Watch out for that one too. Oh, there was one the last go around had the nerve to put 1619 project. I thought that was easy. Woo, throw that one out. So, I mean, and then what I do is I send a note to every one of my board friends and say, check out page 3. And so those schools will automatically get busted there. But then there are some other schools. For example, one that got me into a lot of trouble because I supported it was a school called Rocket Ship, which was actually an out-of-state school, which I'm really not keen on, but we don't have a choice in that. The governor's, that's the law. We have to accept that. But it was to go in an area of Fort Worth called Stop 6. Not one school in that area was above a D. And so I saw the need for something. Now the truth is my reputation's on the line, so I call them up every about 3 or 4 weeks and say, have you looked into doing such, they're probably thinking, don't ever get that lady on your case because she's gonna want to see that. But I wanna see it succeed. When they don't have children reading after being in the 3rd grade, they need to get that done. So there are charter schools that I will support. There's a couple of charter schools now that are coming out. One of them's developed with Hillsdale College. Some of you know Hillsdale College, and I'm hoping that gets on the agenda. But charter schools, all we get is an up or down vote. I used to think that was bad. It's not bad because now I don't have to read all of those things. I just have to hear what the commissioner says. Out of like 20 will apply. The commissioner will pass 10 of them, and then we get to do an up or down vote on the other 10. Or on the 10, and so that's a lot easier than studying all those yourself. It's very, very time consuming. I couldn't imagine writing a charter for a charter school. It's horrible. The most important thing though would be the standards, and this is where the CRT comes in. This is also where I'm sure y'all have heard about what's going on with books and the problems with books. We had a situation, was it last year? Since COVID, I haven't been able to tell 1 week or 1 month from another, but it seems like it was about 6 months ago. The question came up, who's responsible for the books? Who is responsible? And the Association of School Boards said, well, the State Board of Education is. Not true. School board, local school board is responsible for making sure you have good books in your school. And so I thought that was kind of strange because we're always talking about we'd like to have more local control. And it's a lot easier for you as a parent to go to a board member and say, I'd really like to talk about such and such, than it would be for coming to me and me, having to go through all the rigmarole. They know the schools, they know what the kids need. But the fact is, people just push the issue a whole lot. And you also have to remember that there's 2 types of books in the schools. They're the kind that the teacher assigns you to read, and then there's books that are in the library that you can choose from. You don't want pornography in any of them. I'm not justifying that in any book. But the difference between having a kid read a book and whether that book's in the library are 2 different things. There's certain books that just seem to be a real problem. One of those books is a book called The Kite Runner. And The Kite Runner has in it a very vicious scene. And actually, I had to read it 3 times to understand what it was because it was so written on a level, it wasn't just blatant. But if you're going to have kids, and kids that are high school taking an advanced class in geography, It's a wonderful book, tells you about what's going on in Afghanistan. If you wanted to figure out what's happening there, it tells you how that culture is affected and everything. But if you're gonna have a kid read it, it is incumbent upon the teacher to make sure that the parents know it, approve of it, and if they don't approve of it, then you have an alternate book. That's the way I think it should be done, and that's the way they generally do in this particular area. But, for example, Pflugerville, no, not Pflugerville, the next town up, not Cedar Park.
Roundabout.
No, it's down in that area.
Leander.
Leander. One of the required reading books was The Life of Jeffrey Dahmer. I went, oh, you've got to be kidding me. What kind of teacher would assign that kind of book? It was also at Leander, they had some pretty racy books, and this was, I thought, kind of funny. A bunch of the moms went to the school board meeting, and they all had sections of the book they were supposed to read. And I mean, it was really racy. And the president of the school board said, you're gonna have that, we can't listen to that anymore. And she said, how do you think I feel about my child having to listen to that as a student? They stopped it at the board meeting, but it, you know, you would have thought that it would have made a big impression, but they didn't just make any big changes right away. But I think that I don't know where they are with it now. I thought the gentleman, the superintendent in Granbury, did the smartest thing. When there were a bunch of people coming up with what they thought should be banned books, he, and working with his board, figured out a committee, the old committee system. But here's what you had to do if you were on the committee. You had to agree to read the whole book. None of this, let's see what I can find here. No, you had to read the whole book. Then they had to come back and discuss. And they had one, I think they were given, so it's a big task because you had to read a lot of different books. But they came back and they said, this book is out. This book will stay. And they had to all pretty much agree to it, that this would stay. And I think that is a local school board option to help alleviate that. I know that, I don't know how many of you paid attention to what was going on in Fort Worth last week. They had the Library Association, and the Library Association had drag queen presentation. And so naturally there are a lot of parents who are very concerned, and that made me very concerned because I thought that's in your face, that what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing. Why would you have a drag queen? But they have these storybook things that the drag queen thing does. And so I think that there's going to be more to come from that particular thing, because that would have been some of the CRT indirectly. The CRT is kind of a Trojan horse, and all these different things have come underneath it. Originally it started out very simply. I could explain CRT. CRT was the opposite of what Martin Luther King wanted to do. Martin Luther King wanted people not to be judged by their color of their skin, but their content of their character. A very, very important thing that came out of that civil rights movement. But the reverse of that is to blame everything on the whites as privileged and blacks as not privileged, and underestimate so many talented black kids. I mean, like, you can't do that advanced math, so we'll stop having the advanced math, that sort of thing. But then it's grown out of 2 or 3 different ways. It's grown into the form of the push for a sexual identity. I found out that in some schools in this area, I don't know what's going to be done about it, but the first day of school, they get to choose their gender. No, not gender.
Pronouns.
I did not know that until just yesterday. I couldn't believe it. That is insane. And this is like little bitty kids. Well, if we tighten up the rules, then that sort of stuff will have to go away. But that's all kind of under the auspices of critical race. the other thing that comes out of that is social and emotional learning. And social and emotional learning is such it's such a problem for any of you who've been in teaching for a long time. You know that we taught teachers to do the social and emotional learning. Really, it was really something that was trained for the teachers. If I had a child in my class, we were talking about gifted children. Gifted children can be such a pain. I mean, they are so smart sometimes, and they're smarter than the teacher. You've got to be able to admit that. But if you don't understand what makes them tick, then you can do a lot of damage to that kind of kid. You need to be able to say, okay, we'll let you go with this and let them run with it or something like that. And that was the idea of understanding what makes a kid tick. This would be true of other children in your school, and that's why they have different labels for different kind of kids for those different reasons. But what they've come out to do with the social and emotional learning, they've taken it like a deeper thing, like, oh, you don't feel good today? Is there something happening in your house that we need to know about?
Mm-hmm.
And, can you mark, even kindergarten kids, marking a smiley face or a frown? If you get too many frowns, they're calling the CPA on you, or CPA?
CPS.
CPS. You can tell I've been around trouble, the CPS on you to see why is your child not happy. But that's kind of carrying it too far. And this is what is really very frustrating. Who has time for all that? If I'm teaching what I'm supposed to be teaching, that makes it very, very difficult to get down those rabbit holes of social and emotional. When we learn social and emotional, some of you that are teachers in here might agree with me, it was something we worked with the teachers and got them to have an understanding so that they would work better with the students. But this is really working with the students themselves and trying to get them to feel better about what they're doing and so forth. You know how kids feel good about themselves? They do a good job on their work. If they can work really hard and make a good grade, or if it's a hard teacher and they make a passing grade, they feel good about themselves. But anyway, that's the social and emotional learning, and I don't know.
We're gonna start moving.
Huh?
We're gonna start moving forward.
What?
We're almost out of time.
Oh, okay. This is the way I taught school. They would be leaving the hall, and I go, and don't forget, because we ran out of time. At any rate, I will quit it at that point. You're lucky that y'all don't have some of the same problems that they have in the big city. We're not quite there. But I do want to say something I came up with. This was just in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. Ronald Reagan said, successful politics really is about addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division. And I would say successful education is really about addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division. Thank you, Ronald Reagan.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, Pat, I do have a question, or something that I don't know if you know about. There was listen to Fox News, there was a book that was introduced to the kids, elementary, first, second grade, that they were supposed to go home and read it and identify the racist members of their family.
Whoa.
The
And
people.
that was in Washington, D.C.
Oh, of course.
That's all of them.
Yeah, that is just unbelievable. I mean, I have to tell you that the first time I heard critical race theory was Tucker Carlson, and I was in my bed watching it about midnight or something, because I tape it always to watch it, and he kept saying critical race theory, CRT, and I had to write it down because I thought, that is the weirdest word, critical race theory. And if you have time, you need to go back and look it up or read some of the different things that are about it, because it is taken on a life of its own in every place that you find it. And if you watch that regularly, you'll see examples that are not good of all that. I sent to him the information about the math books in Florida, the critical race theory that was in the math books. They just create these stories to be, you know, kind of a racist. What percentage, and that might have been where I saw something about percentages of your family are racist, and if you had da-da-da-da-da, it was in their math questions. You were working out percentages that way, so he can send it to you. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Well, what's the current makeup of the 15 districts, Republican versus Democrat?
It is a, it was six to, 9, Republican 9, 6 Democrat. And after this election, it could be, there's some that might switch to being Republican, actually. One of them might switch to be a Republican. So for a long time, we were 10-5, but we lost one person that didn't run again, and he was replaced by a Democrat. Yeah.
Has there been any discussion, going back to the first part of your presentation, about what types of consequences would be in place for people who disregarded not teaching critical race theory? I mean, it seems to me that we're gonna have to have something, you know, I mean, when you're talking about teaching, I taught also, and you know, in the classroom, there have to be consequences for behavior. And this is one of the things, so the thing is when you have people who go out there and say, yeah, you know, Mox Nix.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, so they say this, whatever.
Generation
I mean,
Z.
Is there a severity level or saying, listen, when we say don't teach some of these things in the classroom, you know?
Well, I talked to Louis Gomer when we were doing on the campaign thing, and about this very thing, because he's a pretty good political mind, and he said, well, for sure, school districts cannot withhold salaries, pay, because that is contract. But he said the best way to get people to comply is to withhold money to a district. In other words, if they have things going on, if they aren't regulating it in their district, but that will be strictly up. I tell you who will probably be making that decision is Lieutenant Governor, because he'll push it through the Senate. If you have ideas, you need to send them to him.
So Pat, I had one other question.
Yeah.
So are you gonna be responsible, or is the board gonna be responsible for when a teacher sits there and says to students that when you're born, the doctor has to make a decision whether you're a boy or a girl? This was actually taught in first, second grade, where the male teacher was telling these kids
that is not in our standards.
Okay, but I mean, who would hold that teacher accountable for that?
That person in the very back of the room there that's on the school board. He's gonna leave this meeting and say, I don't even wanna come back. But we can't hold them responsible. We can say this is what they should not have been doing, but it would be the local district that will have to, and that's really the way you want it. You want local control.
People need to go to the school board meetings.
Yes.
That's right.
I was just gonna comment.
Find out
Just
what
real
their
quick.
kids are studying.
So I would say that any parent who has an issue with what's being taught in their child's classroom needs to file a grievance. And they need to follow that grievance process through to the TEA if necessary.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hardy.